and to thank you, all of you, for completing the survey. We had 25 survey respondents in very short time, sharing your concerns and your learning opportunities. If you had the chance to review what Kinkini sent around this afternoon, you see that really you surfaced some very pertinent issues. The session that we'll follow right now is designed to be an interactive session with Katira, our equity trainer coach, who will deconstruct a few examples that you provided and facilitate a discussion on how we might address the moment of expressed inequity, and really how we can demonstrate allyship regardless of possible feelings. I'll speak for myself, of ineptness or discomfort in that moment. We will know that our action may not be perfect, but that those actions are crucial to disrupt negative, exclusive dynamics in real time and model what welcoming and inclusive space really feels like. When I think about a welcoming and inclusive space at USBC, I often think about how we begin with our community norms. So, Kinkini, I don't know if you want to show those, but I'll read them for you for the sake of time. Our community norms begin, everyone participates. Step up, step back, participate fully and evenly. Listen well for deep understanding and respect. Be fully present and open to new learning. Speak your discomforts. Place your technology on silent and stay checked in. Share using I statements. Share responsibility for the success of each meeting. So I hope that you all find those as useful as I do. And when I think about sharing responsibility for the success of this meeting, I think a lot about the role of the host committee. Kinkini, you put the next slide. So Kinkini has really thoughtfully put together these on-site roles for us all to consider. That as a host committee, this is what we are meant to do, and what Karin will be helping us today to do better than we've ever done before. So our goal is facilitation support at the regional meetings. We'll moderate breakout panel sessions. We'll introduce awardees and speakers, facilitate identity caucus spaces. We'll perform poster review and judging, and we'll also help direct traffic, which is in fact a really important task in helping people to feel grounded and included. I couldn't be more enthusiastic to have leading this ship tonight, Katira, who is the Director and Community Management Center at the University of New Mexico. She is a national trainer with the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, where she conducts undoing racism workshops across the nation. She also teaches university courses which focus on anti-racist education, peace, and justice. Karin presented the keynote at the 2016 National Conference, and we are delighted to have her support us in our equity learning and practice tonight. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you all for taking the time to join me today. And I know that this is an ongoing process, and 1.5 hours will help, but it won't be everything that you need. So I go in humbly, knowing that this won't be everything that you need to really help be coaches to each other, because ultimately you are the leadership that's going to help steer your peers and others along. And from what I know already about you all, you've had so much experience in navigating and negotiating these conversations in your own ways and together. So I'm really looking forward to sharing a little bit today. And the way we wanted to do it is to sort of first, I'm going to do a little bit of listening to you all. I'm going to give you an introductions kind of exercise. We just had the community agreements, and to those I will add one additional thing. And then we're going to have some scenarios, and they're going to be based on things that you shared in the questions that were asked of you. And those scenarios hopefully capture some of the three major themes. And I really want to thank Amelia and Kinkini for helping to really help shape what those scenarios will be. And they're going to take part in giving us a little bit of a background and sharing that scenario, and then we're going to dive in, and actually it's going to be like a moment of role playing. What would we say? What would we do? How would we address this? And we're going to talk to each other about what the best ways might be, and I'm going to try and guide that conversation. So that's going to be a chunk of our time today. And then I'm going to end with some tools, and just so you know, the places and spaces that I'm drawing from are quite extensive. This is not Karin just presenting Karin's work, or you know, coming up with all of this all by herself. This is from years of listening and learning to organizations and networks like Race Forward has really informed a lot of what I'll be sharing. YWCA, Annie Casey Foundation and Kellogg that have given me tools and trainings that have helped. Using John Singleton's work with Courageous Conversations, and Sonia Nieto's work has been very foundational for me as well. And so many others, right? As the People's Institute is a major, major contributor to my understanding. And so I want to give some credit to what I will be sharing and any kind of coaching that I provide. It's really based on listening and learning to so many people over the years. It's been over 20 years of this work for me. So, and just so you know that everyone is a work in progress is another piece. And especially when it comes to race talk or interrupting things that are happening in the moment, no one is done. We often stumble, and often, you know, we think back to something that we said and we're like, oh, we should have said it different. Know that, own it, know that's part of it, and no one is going to perfectly navigate any of those situations. But the more we do it, the better we get at it, like everything, right? So we're going to do some of that role playing today. I would love for either Kinkini or Amelia to help me with timekeeping, if that's okay, or Emily, any one of you, to just make sure we leave enough time for questions as well. So I'm hoping about 15 minutes for each of the scenarios at most is the gauge, right? So that we can give them a little bit of time each. So each one of you, I'm going to ask you to take just 2 minutes to write down 10 words that say something about your culture, your background, who you are, and you're going to write them as a string of words. And then we're going to go around and everyone's going to say their name and share those 10 words. It's just a string of words. It's not a full-blown poem, right? Unless someone wants to go there. So everyone take 2 minutes, write 10 words. Say something about your culture, your identity, your ways of being, your people, your land, anything that you want to share about yourself that's meaningful. Okay, just going to give you a few more seconds, maybe 10 seconds to just wrap up your thoughts. Not to worry, it's just a string of words, so don't try and make it too perfect. Okay, so anyone can get started, and what we'll do is just listen. So the role of the rest of us is to listen to each other, and then I am going to ask you why we would even start a conversation like this. So think on that, but all we're going to do for the next minute or two is listen to each other's 10 words. And anyone can jump in with their 10 words.
Yeah, well, what if I have 2 words for one, but it's gonna lower me to 2. I got like 2 words all the time. Should I go ahead and say it?
So don't worry about how many words you have or any of that. Some of you are going to have 15, some of you are going to have 3, right?
Right.
Just don't make it 28. And the hope is that we just listen, the rest of us, and don't laugh or comment about your own words or other people's. We're just going to listen. So you want to start it off? Any one of you. And in fact, I can if you want.
Okay. Yeah, Muswamba. My name is Muswamba, and I'm gonna start off. Words. Should I say 1, 2, or should I just go ahead?
Just go and say the words, one after the other.
Okay. You say the word culture, so I say extended family, respect of elders, Christian faith, high morality value, strong self-identity, strong self-esteem, protect order, fairness, generosity, be the captain of your soul, strive for excellence, and be yourself wherever you are.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And I can see some of the names, so maybe Sarah, you want to?
Sure. I am the only Sarah. Okay. My words were storyteller, daughter, fresh water, cold air, sunny days, creative spark, quiet heart.
Emily?
Kind, connected, spiritual, survivors, married, Ireland, Scotland, North Carolina, Massachusetts, woman, white.
Amelia?
Mountains, rocks, raw, practical, industrious, survivor, privileged, white, lucky, here.
Kinkini?
Indian, politics, West Bengal, arts, letters, all-consuming passion, spiritual, Bay Area native, woods, liberation, privileged.
Liz?
White, cisgender, hetero, woman, mother, advocate, IBCLC, lawyer, blunt, articulate, impatient.
Brenda?
Mom, dedicated, family, persistent, Midwest, hardworking, military, privileged, traveler, learner.
Cheryl?
Mother, wife, advocate, descendant of adoption, 4th child, white, wanderer, and Christian childhood.
Malia?
sacred, hardworking, bold, strong, family, native, and Black.
Danae?
Singer, rooted, relentless, Christian, peaceful, honest, joyful.
Miriam?
Mexican, American, female, Chicago, bilingual, educated, native speaker, young, traveler, daughter, sister, tia.
Okay, and then we have some where the names are not showing up. So anyone want to jump in?
Hi, this
I'll
is
jump
Suzanne.
in. Go ahead, Suzanne.
This is Suzanne. I put white, female, agnostic, pescatarian, mother, nutritionist, artist, yogi, learner, and positive.
Hi, this is Akia. I put Black, mixed, hetero, Jamaica, U.S., East Coast, and West Coast, city, suburbs, strong, proud, educated, family-oriented, hardworking.
Hi, this is Anna. Hispanic, woman, learner, educator, mother, grandmother, wife, Christian, advocator, IBCLC.
Hello, this is Adelana Robinson from USBC, Catholic, Mexican, bilingual, fun, traveler, empathy, and soul food lover, and beautiful.
Hi, this is Carol McGowan. Third culture, respect for elders, non-blood family, village, no waste, pacifism, one world, granola, Mother Earth, privileged and restless.
I think there's just one more.
Can you all hear me?
Mm-hmm.
This is Sahira. I'm African American, female, mother, wife, daughter, sister, friend, doctor, and driver.
Mm-hmm. Okay, why would I, is there anyone else? Has anyone not contributed? Okay, why would I ask this question or have you do this exercise right at the beginning?
I can't say why you would ask us to do it, but I can say that it struck me how differently we all see ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I think it sets sort of the context of who's in the room and what's important to each of us as individuals, and allows you to kind of find some similarities and differences along the way.
Mm-hmm. And both of you bring to the forefront why we would do this. It kind of helps us see that we have these different experiences, different lenses, even in a group that's coming together that should have some similarities, right? You're all working on similar things, stepping up to be a part of these circles, and yet you have all of these different lenses. And that means that any conversation that we're going to have is going to have those different lenses bringing different perspectives to things, right? We're all going to see it from different angles. And the more we understand that with whomever we're working with or whomever we're conversing with, the better we sort of give them that benefit of the doubt that, oh, it might have to do with that was their background, that was their upbringing, that was their lens, right, that brought them to this. And so think about anyone in the mix where you might have had a very different perspective and realize that you're going to see things very differently. The same thing could happen in a situation. And because of your lens, because of your experience, you're going to see a difference. And what that does is it gives you a sense of empathy towards others, right? And patience to the fact that sometimes my life experience might have shown me how racism is real, and it can be violent, and it can be aggressive, and it's happening in micro ways every day. So I pick up on things a lot quicker when they're happening, right? And other people may have had a background where they haven't had to think about it day to day. And so they may come to it in a way that's like, well, I didn't see that, or, you know, that are you being overly sensitive, or is that something that's real, right? So you are going to get all of the range of that based on how you've been sensitized over time, right, to what's going on and why. And so know that even in the spaces that you're going to be in, and know that the people who raise things are not doing it because they're hypersensitive. They're doing it because they are more attuned to what's going on, right? They have seen enough, they have experienced enough that they're able to pick up on things that maybe some of the rest of us aren't picking up on. And so given all of that, I'm going to just give you a little brief intro to 3 scenarios that we're going to share with you. And we are going to give you a chance to pull them apart and say, what could have been done? How could it have been, you know, navigated? So if you see something like this, and it could be in the upcoming conference, it's really a question of like, what would you do? How would you intercept or play a role in facilitating the dialogue? So it's almost like a role play. But what I will say is look out for certain things, right? So remember, based on some of the readings I'm going to be sharing with you and passing on to you and some of the tools, think about whether doing nothing adds to the problem and can be an ineffective strategy. Whether sidetracking the conversation is problematic, right? Someone brings up the fact that they've seen a microaggression around race, and you might sidetrack and take the conversation elsewhere thinking that's going to be helpful, right? That's ineffective. Appeasing people is ineffective, right? Making them feel like, oh, you know, like, let's calm down, let's think about, you know, something else, or have them focus on something to appease the situation and say that, you know, that they're overreacting is ineffective. Terminating the discussion can be ineffective. Sometimes it's a tool to sort of have us wrap things up so that we can take it to a deeper conversation later. Hopefully it's not to cut it because you're feeling like things are out of control or something, right? Sometimes you terminate a discussion if things get verbally violent, right? Then there's a need to terminate the discussion. But usually terminating the discussion is not that effective. Becoming defensive, even as a facilitator, right? Because you might see an interaction that results in someone of your own group being attacked. You start defending or getting defensive. That's usually not. Some of the ways to, and some successful strategies are tied to keeping context in mind. So if you see something and you're looking at the person and realizing I actually know them, or I know of them, and they are someone that comes from a privileged background or has a lack of understanding in these issues, how to navigate that, right? In a way that instead of jumping on them, pulling them to the side, having some understanding of, you know, the differences in the room. Or if someone is really, really emotional and you're uncomfortable with it, that's not understanding the context either, right? You're not understanding that they might have a very good reason to be emotional, and still speaking to them by taking to the side and having a conversation. Acknowledge and be open to admitting your own racial biases is okay in facilitating these conversations. Validate and facilitate discussions of feelings. Feelings matter when things get emotional. Control the process and not the content of the race talk. Sometimes people start lecturing in the middle of a dialogue or discussion. And give, questions are great for helping people move along. Validate and encourage expressions of when people are speaking up, really help them see that that's a good thing to bring up your discomfort. It's a good thing to bring up how this doesn't sit well with you, because they're trying to be honest, right? And they're trying to be open. So how to bring it in. But based on what you all said, there were 3 major areas that we wanted to have a sort of a deep dive and have a conversation around. And I'm looking at it's 4 o'clock, and so we're going to spend about 15 minutes at most on each of these scenarios. And the first one, if Kinkini can help us set the context for this one, had to do with a white film maker who was presenting her film, and I would like for Kinkini to share a little bit of what happened, and then we're going to ask you what could have been done, and have a go at pretending I am, or Kinkini is the person, right? You're talking to us. So Kinkini, you want to give the context and the story?
Sure, and the reason we are sharing this is that it came up when you look at your survey response. This came up twice or thrice from that. So there were many folks here on this call who were at that session. So this is a single story and with many voices. So please jump in. This was we had a screening of a film, and the director was on site. She was African-American woman, and she had asked a couple of very specific questions of the audience of the film that after we screened that we would speak about. And when the screening was over, there were questions coming, and one white participant, member of the audience, went into a pretty long, lengthy critique of things. And it part of it was it went on, and part of it was it wasn't responding to what the director had specifically asked the audience for. And it needed, at one point in time, it needed the intervention of the leaders of color there to come in and say, you've got to stop. There was, I think, at one point in time, someone turned to a white sister and said, you need to go handle it. But folks are here, you can add to that story, but it really needed, again, folks of color to kind of disrupt and have the onus of stopping that interruption.
And the whole notion is that the burden fell on the people of color. There was a sort of shutting down of the conversation that was ensuing. So how could things have been handled? So people that were there, they might want to add, but what do you think could have been said? What do we say in that situation?
And if there are other variations of, your idea of what happened, because it was like pretty emotional for many of us. So if I've not got all the details right, please feel free to reframe how it happened.
Katie, before we go on, could you put us back into Brady Bunch view so we can see each other, the benefit of Zoom?
Yes. Great.
There we go. Thank you.
Okay, so anyone can jump in.
So do you want us to react to what could have been said or done differently?
Yeah. So how
in
should
terms
it have gone?
So it looks like they had a monologue from one participant, white, who was just commenting on and on what she saw. I guess I would have asked her if I was the producer that to keep a comment and then we can discuss about that in private, because there is many people who may want to say something, who want to react to something, but if she's monologuing, that means she's really eating time for everybody to say something. She can ask one question and shut up, and then the other one, we can deal with it in private, one-on-one. So just to respect all the folks that are in the meeting. And then the time of the producer, because that was one question. Maybe she had more questions.
What are others thinking?
I'm not sure why they said that people of color needed to address her and not, you know, if she was a white person speaking inappropriately, why it wouldn't be okay for another white person to say something. I don't understand that.
Yeah. Do I need any clarification points, or we are just taking?
Yeah, clarify.
I think there were a lot of white folks who intervened later. I think it's really who jumped in first and who came into it. So there were other forms of interventions, one-to-one that happened. That I hope those things come up and around. So yes, go ahead.
This is Liz, and I understood Kenny, and I was there for the first part of the movie, and then I left right before the question and answer period. So I know of this incident. I know it was important, and but I know about it secondhand. But when in a scenario like that, where you have allies in the room who are white and leaders who are of color, and the offender, so to speak, is white, I believe it is a better role for the allies, the whites, to come collect their people, right? It shouldn't be the job of those who are oppressed to shut down the person who's being a pain in the neck. I think Maswamba raises a point that in a lot of the events that were happening at USBC, where there is like a question and answer period afterwards, whether it was a formal presentation, I think it might be a good idea to have like a designated sergeant at arms who, because when somebody is perceived as having the role in the room of kind of, making sure the questions and answers start on time. As this person started to monologue, we could have just cut her off on time alone before she got launched into even offensive language. But the way I heard Kinkiny's description was that some of the folks of color in the room were upset that white allies did not rise to the level of coming and collecting their people.
One of the things that I was in the room for this scenario, one of the things I wondered a lot about is in a scenario where someone actually has a physical microphone. So to cut them off has a different challenge, and what are like the physical cues, like the literal hand on the shoulder to it's time, let's move on, and whether or not that's appropriate, or I kind of have been thinking a lot about that actually in this year since.
And so I'm going to jump in just for a second there and say a couple of you mentioned the role of a moderator, right, or someone that's in the room that's part of you all and the planning team. So if you feel the conversation was too much one-sided and one person only speaking, then it is your role as the moderator to maybe ask the audience, is there anyone that would like to respond, or is there anyone that would like to share their thoughts, right? So we don't completely cut off the conversation, but we stop the monologuing, right? Or the offensive talk, and trying to get others. So it's not you that's necessarily addressing them, but you're asking the audience. And in the audience, if you find that it's a lot of just people of color speaking up and not enough white people, then you as the moderator can say, okay, anyone in this area want to share, right? You might find an area where there's more white people without saying, hey, white people, where are you, right? And have them respond as well. And so you kind of, you're navigating the conversation and facilitating without being the one that directly says that that was offensive. You really need to, and the only time you would do that and step in is if you go to the audience and you hear more of it, right? Let's say you did open it up to the audience and they were being as offensive, you know, and adding to her commentary. So in those kinds of scenarios, you might have to be the moderator that says, okay, I need to just address a few things here and only pick one or two things that were majorly, like there could have been a whole string of things, but pick one or two where you say, okay, let me pick up on that point. We need to think about history and why this might not be an appropriate thing to say because of history and what we know about history. And that's only if the audience and the others don't step in. But you got to rely on the people, right, to speak to the people and have trust and faith that people will bring each other around. And sometimes they don't. So you step in. But if the monologue is going to a point where it's getting, the person doesn't want to stop, and so Cheryl was just asking, do you do something physical, right, to bring them to a stop? You might actually say to them, thank you, thank you, thank you, right? And take the microphone and say, I would like for the audience to blah, 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 or touching isn't such a good idea, right? But you can sort of cut the conversation. It's okay to say, thank you, thank you, thank you, right in the middle of them talking, right? And be able to take the mic to sort of steer it. But yeah, some people might not want to give the mic, might not want to, and that's when you might use the AC switch. You might try to have the audience know that we're gonna cut this conversation short. That's if it just gets too much, they're not giving it up, right? But I don't think that happened in this case, right? That they did stop eventually. Anyone else want to add?
I was going to add to kind of respond to Amelia's question. How do we get white women to be allies in these situations? And I think my perception is that many times when we attend a conference, we're kind of on autopilot. We're just there. We're like giant sponges. We're there in a very passive role to absorb information, observe and listen. And I think that taking an active role to advocate on someone else's behalf, step in and intervene, is not necessarily normal conference behavior for a lot of people. So I think it takes this kind of intentional, having moderators that are, but I think our general conference attendees, that might be outside of the box for a lot of them.
Yeah, good point. And that's where the moderator or whomever the facilitator is has to keep encouraging them, right, to participate. But you're so right. And then there's a fear, right, in the audience. The white people who are not stepping up, and I don't know how many of you are in the crowd that might want to say why you might not step up, right? And one of the things could be what Brenda said. You're not used to it. You're not used to speaking up, right, in an audience. Does anybody else want to say why they don't intervene?
Something that I was in the audience, and something that came to my mind as it was happening was that in the sort of framing of the Q&A and in the program book, we had called this a session to provide feedback. And so it wasn't until like very far down the line that I was like, oh, this is very inappropriate feedback, because at first it just rang to me as feedback. And now looking back, and if it were to happen again, I would understand how inappropriate her feedback was. And so I think that that's another piece too, is that the way that we frame Q&A which I think can just be a dicey thing anywhere. And I have seen sort of like many at like non-conference, non-work related film screenings, Q&As just sort of like go off the rails because of like a rogue audience member. And I was like, oh my God, it's happening here. And so I think that's it too, is like not framing things like we're not at our conference here to provide feedback on film. Like that's not what we're here for. We're here to celebrate the work of this film. And I think that doing a better job of framing something to our audience would also be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd like to, oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
So I agree with that. And along the lines of framing, I think, again, the role of the moderators and overall hosts of the conference is just in general setting some expectations around this is how I'm going to run Q&A. This is how this session will be run. And, you know, prevention doesn't prevent everything, we know. But I do think setting some expectations around, I'm not going to have any questions going this long, or please limit it to one question or one comment, that kind of thing. That said, I went to a conference recently where it felt like there were 10 minutes of admonishments before every single session that felt really belittling and restrictive as an audience member. So I think it has to be careful and very intentional in how that's framed, but I think it is important. And I'll also say that in terms of going back to that question of why allies don't step up, I really struggle because I'm somebody who in general steps up and steps up and steps up. And so I've come to consider my work to know when to step back and to do so, and to not take away anybody else's opportunity to, speak truth to power in their time, in their way. And so I think I've gotten, don't like gun metaphors, but I think I've gotten a little trigger shy about when to step up, because I don't want to always be seen as like taking away the opportunity for addressing wrongdoing. And I feel like that might sound like I'm trying to, whatever it is, that's how I feel.
Okay, I'm going to wrap this one up with just one piece of the comment that I would like to make. Definitely the role of the moderator and what Emily just said and so many of you just said is important. And it does matter as to where that monologue was going, right? But have more of that presence, that assertiveness in controlling the process, not the content, right? And content only if it gets really, really violent, the language, right? But the process you can control, whether it is pulling them to the side, whether it is asking the audience. But one thing I would say to you all is don't consider yourselves as white people allies. This is all of us, right, that need to be addressing race and racism. So we do need to step into it in that way, that this isn't a people of color only thing that we need to tackle. And so when it comes to undoing racism, it is all of us that are needing to address it. And there are no allies, right? Because we're all part of it. So just that one point for that one. And now we're going to switch gears to a second scenario. Swama, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wonder.
Yes.
We can put the burden on the moderator. I understand that, but also the presenter. This person has made a movie. He asked questions, and he knows when he was trying to lead everybody, or he had a message. So he also has responsibility to control the answer. He could say, "Okay, I hear you. Let me repeat what you say, and then let's see if somebody else in the audience has the same idea." Because the moderator, maybe by respect, does not know what was the intention of that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe the person wanted to be more dramatic. They want to have a debate or something. Unless they have prepared beforehand, I think for those, I wasn't there for the question, but at least you can say, okay, I understand where you're going. It's a very good point you made there, and then hold it, don't go away. Let me ask somebody else who have the same idea or something. So I think the burden also, I mean, you are a speaker, you know what you are a speaker, you are a presenter, you know, you are a producer, you know why you did what you did, and then what's the message you want us to take home.
There's an important point in terms of, but the piece we have control
Karin?
over is USBC can be saying to the presenters beforehand expectations, right? Of, so maybe making sure if someone did want to turn it into, you're almost suggesting that it could have been like a like trying to do a dramatic piece, right? If they were going that route, there should have been some pre-warning, right? They should have
Yeah.
let people know they're going to go there. Kinkini, we need to switch gears, right?
Yeah. I do feel like I need to come into this space and just say one thing. I know I've already spoken once, but to say that is that we go into a film screening with a lot of preconceptions. We've seen film screenings other places. We've seen what's in the conference book. But when there's a lay person of color up front, listen to her words.
Yeah.
She was crystal. She said, watch this film, answer these 2 questions. So to us, we were immediately able to see what are you not understanding about what Elizabeth Gray just asked you to answer. So it's like how people can be invisible, their words, they say it, and yet we have preconceived notions of what this space should be like. So the only thing I'd close to say is that there was a Facebook, there was a Move On Open forum that just happened where Kamala Harris was speaking and somebody stormed the stage, and the Move On person, Karin Japier, like literally stood in front of her. I don't know if you guys have seen that or not, but the white woman who was actually moderating the session, she was much slower. Did you see? It's a visual thing, and just see that clip. And that clip encapsulates exactly what happened here, is that how she threw herself, not knowing who this man was on the stage, what he would do. And what she said afterwards is, I stood as a body block in front of Senator Harris, but who was looking out for me, was what she said. So that's the feeling sometimes you feel when you jump into the thing, but who's looking out? So yeah, sorry to take that up, but I wanted to, like, we were, about a real situation, we were, kind of assuming things that I wanted to clear up.
Thank you, Kinkini. That makes a lot of sense. And for that example as well. That's great. I would love for Amelia, if you would like to share the second scenario.
Yeah, so this scenario comes in a lot of different forms, and I think everyone on the call will be familiar with it. And it came to my mind to share here because on the most recent crash call, where we were sharing our hopes and fears and aspirations and what we wanted out of this training, it's very interesting to me that both people who had been to our conference in the past and people who will be coming for the first time shared one concern, which was that they express feeling anxiety when they go to lactation conferences related to disparaging comments made about different types of lactation support providers. And so when we think about intersectionality, our conference has this other layer that I think we would do well to really think about. And, I wanted to share in this context, and I think it will be good, for, us to think in other spaces as well. Within the lactation support provider constellation, we have a group of 20 national organizations that have representatives from every lactation training, accreditation, mentoring organization, and public health partners that have all come together. And I'm going to put on the screen, or into the chat box, rather, the Lsp Declaration of Intent. Let's see, did that go? Looks like it disappeared. Maybe I can't cut and paste. Okay, I'll read. So, whereas all parents and babies have a right to the access to trained lactation support to reach their goals, whereas all lactation support providers bring value to the landscape of care, therefore we agree to work collaboratively to influence opportunities for change to increase access to lactation support. And the 3 phrases took 2 days for us to write, and it took about 5 years for us to live. And I can tell you that the words trained and the words value are both needed to be unpacked for a plural number of years to really make it so everyone could embrace. We all bring value, we all provide service, we're all here because we care, and that it is the family that decides what has value for them. We center the needs of the family. They get to decide what is going to mean the most to them. And we want to ensure that they have the access to that. And similarly, we want to ensure that every lactation support provider type has the full access to whatever training or reimbursement or aspirations or support or mentoring community that they want as defined by them without assumptions. And I think that when we come into the conference, we see a lot of different forms that this kind of disparaging ideas of different provider types can come up. We've seen it happen around sponsorship. We've seen it of like exhibit tables. We have seen it happen sometimes in the breakout sessions where I think a really common scenario, I think we've gotten a lot better. I think Kinney has been incredibly diligent about the screening and working with speakers, but making sure that, you know, the people who are of the experience are the ones who are sharing about the experience. So there's not, you know, a group receiving funding talking about a group that they partnered with, but the partners are also there and get speaking time. So, you know, I think this is, again, there's lots of different scenarios, but I just wanted to, my new insight about it is, right, is that, you know, intersectionality in the USBC context, in the first food context, includes different lactation support provider types all having value and, you know, all bringing something important to the table. And that I think we want our conference to welcome everyone explicitly, regardless of how it is that they're serving people, serving families, what it is they bring, and that be really front and center so that no one feels like there's a better kind of provider to be than others.
So, Amelia, I'll ask you one thing. Give me an example of a provider that might not be seen as valued. So would it be more of a curandera type that's looking at traditional?
Yeah, I'll just say, like, very generally, let's just say peer counselor, which would, you know, encompass like a whole category. So a peer counselor,
Yeah, so a peer counselor. And so you might, in a session or in a setting, see, what might you see at the conference? What would someone do regarding diminishing a provider in some way?
Well, I think it can be, sometimes it can come as subtle as, you know, well, maybe someday you could be an IBCLC.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So even that is this like loaded kind of thing that I think subtly suggests, and I think Andreas for teaching me this, that it, you know, it assumes that that person wants to be anything other than what they are.
Yeah.
It assumes that they have that aspiration and access to do that if that's what they wanted to do, and that there's something better.
Yeah.
So even if that little tiny comment has like all these layers of inference about it that can shut people down. And I think we want to really be, because I suspect this happens all over this conference. And I don't know, I'm sure other people can think of other examples. I mean, is this
I would
familiar to you?
And I would love people to respond to the very specific example you just gave, right? So the comment of one day you might want to be, right?
One day you could be, one day you could be an IBCLC, or you could even be an IBCLC,
So what do we say
overhear that in some room,
Yeah, you might hear that. What would you say? You're sitting in that room and you're part of this leadership team. What are you going to say in that setting in real time? Let's hear some comments from you all.
If you want to put it in a racial perspective or just in terms of credentials?
It's both, and usually sometimes they intersect.
Yeah, the reason I ask that is because many people who have credentials. In terms of volume, I would say will be white because they have the opportunity to have that, and then people will be maybe peer counselor would be younger at the beginning, and then people of color. So it could be, statistics. When I came in this world, most of the lady I met were older, white. When I say older, that means they have white hair. Maybe they put that. And then, but all my staff who were breastfeeding counselor were younger and mom or young mom and things like that. So there is that generation gap. So we can put that in terms of generation gap, in terms of age. I mean, you don't expect to be a BCLC or PhD when you're 21. I mean, I have met 21 PhD, but it comes with time. So sometimes it could be way wild encourage. I mean, you can say, okay, don't expect to be a PhD at BCLC university professor at 21. There is a process. Wait to get there. It's more complex. But what I don't want to do is put down someone just because they are younger. The answer I give sarcastically sometimes is like, yeah, you are making your life when the other one are dying. So don't worry about it. You're gonna get there.
Muswamba, I love that you're. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. I use humor so we can go through it. But what I will do if I notice that, and then I've been in the middle of those two, I encourage the one who will need more credentials. I will not even wait for them. I will encourage them if they want to. But also, I will tell them that we have more to learn from the people in the field, the people in the community, because being somebody who reads in the books is very different than somebody who is in a community. Okay. Because they have reality, they have relationships that I don't have. I may read, but I cannot create those relationships they do have. So we have both together work. I can bring something to you, which could be a methodology or a way of speaking that is more scientific, more acceptable. And then I can also use your relationship, try to use your language to access the same people.
So, Muswamba, I really appreciate how you are connecting to the humanity and the journey that we're all on. And for myself, I would probably try to go with the perspective that Amelia started with of, we're just so grateful that there are all these different options that parents can choose from now. And in this kind of situation, I try to avoid further personalizing it and letting that person personalize it if they want to, but instead make more of a declarative scripted statement like, I'm so glad that we now have so many peer and professional lactation supporters that are available for moms and families nowadays. Just to get back to the real goal that we're all trying to come to and reaffirm who that person is, not need to suggest that she or he should be striving for something more or different, but without, again, making it seem like, I feel like if it's too intentionally affirming, like, oh, I'm so glad you're a blah, 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 because personally, it makes me feel really shy if someone does that to me in front of others. So I like to just back it up, but affirm the overall picture.
What are others thinking? What would you do? What would you say?
I'm an IBCLC, and I've been around this argument for most of the 22 years I've been an IBCLC. I am personally a big tent kind of person. So when I hear that kind of stuff, I usually say something like, there's more than enough work to go around, and not everybody needs an IBCLC. And I use that reference because I am an IBCLC. And that tends to just kind of, it just says, yeah, whatever. I agree that we shouldn't get into the weeds of the specific characters that are in front of us and whether they are not trained well enough, because we know, and sometimes, especially at USBC, you can say, like, look where we are. We have a lot of work to do. Let's get to the work. and just try to, knock the people off the pedestals who place themselves on the pedestal.
Anything from anyone else?
Hi, so this is Brenda Reyes. I'm actually that person that got targeted a lot in this work for the past 18 years with those comments about credentialing. At every conference that I went to that was majority white, and would always be asked, what's your background? Meaning, what level of education you have, what credentials, how did you get to this work? Because they couldn't believe that a brown bilingual Latina, young, was leading work and was providing training and consulting. So they were always trying to figure me out, like, how did you get that job? Because you don't have that credentialed, or you're not a healthcare provider. So I was often targeted with those comments in my experience for 18 years. When I hear other people make comments like that, I always try to make an affirming statement to that peer counselor. And I say the work that you're doing is so powerful and it's imperative for our communities. It's so valuable.
I would say we all need to listen to the Brendas, right? Because if she is one of the ones being targeted in that way, I would love to hear from her what she would want done, right, in that moment. And so for you to say you would want some sort of affirmation is great, because it says in that moment there has to be something that lets you know you're of value, right? And what you bring to the world is of value. What else, Brenda, do you think would be useful in a setting like that?
Yeah, I think so, affirmation is one, I think a big one, but I think just being very conscientious about even the barriers that Musamba brought about for a lot of our communities. It isn't that we don't maybe necessarily not want that, but just the barriers that communities encounter to be able to obtain a simple certification. It might be simple, but it might be very challenging. I just spoke to a sister of color, connected with her today, and she said, you know what, my IBCLC credential is about to expire. I added, I asked for an extension. I am currently unemployed due to my illness. I am trying to manage. She was very stressed, and just thinking about how many barriers people are dealing with, even to maintain with what they have. So I think the assumption that it's easy to obtain for some folks, being conscientious about that, but also the assumption that people even want that, or yeah, I just think, I just had a lot of experience, people always asking me at every large event, why are you not in IBCLC? Why are you not in IBCLC? Well, you should go take the exam. And it's like, because for the work that I do and the consulting and the providing that I work, I don't feel that I need that and that I could do a good job. And I am doing a valuable and good job without it, so.
Thank you, Brenda. So just closing out this conversation, one of the key things that we just witnessed there is asking the person most affected what they would want to say, or how they would want you to respond in that setting. And then the other piece that I think that we have to keep in mind here is that if you are, Amelia started this whole thing we're all familiar with. And then Liz told us how I can do this as well, right? And Muswamba mentioned how this happens not just to people that are newly starting out, but people who happen to have credentials happen to be white, right? So this is a pattern. We're seeing patterns, and this happens often. That means USBC needs to do something that's preventative regarding this, right? So it could be having keynotes that are the Brendas, right? Having people that are uplifted that don't have the credentials. Having a real spotlight on the value that people bring that might not have some of the, the letters behind their names. And showing how it's not just because we're sort of charitably valuing them. It has a strong impact in our community. They bring a perspective, just like Muswama was saying, they bring experience, they bring a perspective that should be valued, that you can't replicate. Yeah, we can't learn some of the things that they've learned along the way. So maybe making it something that USBC value statement, right? By having them as presenters, having a forum around it, having a notion of how it is really something that we should all start unlearning. And that gets to Emily's notion of general, understanding, a general perspective on this. So I'm going to go to the third one. And then the third one, one last thing then. Muswama, you wanted to add. What did you want to add?
Yeah, I think I've been victim many times of what Brenda, because I'm male, black, and absent. But I grew up since I was a kid in a majority of white, so it doesn't faze me anymore. I expect that, I'm going to say something demeaning, but it doesn't create that thing that is in America. But I think what I want to say really is two words: being genuinely interested, not only curious, because some people are curious because you're there, they think maybe what happened. A male here is really interested in the people's stories. Okay, are you at a conference? What's your story? What did you start from? I mean, things like that. So by knowing the person, you will appreciate what they went through. Like Brenda told me she came here when she was 1 year. So how come you got to Chicago? I'm like, oh, okay. So you learn, and then, call it humility, I guess.
Okay, thank you. Stories matter, by the way. That is the way we're going to get true shifts in a culture of an organization. So let's go to the final one, and I'll make this briefer. This one could be a caucus, right? And you could have one where people of color are coming together, and another one where white people are coming together. And in the people of color caucus, you're seeing that there is some inter-ethnic tension. So you see that Afro-Latinas are feeling that the African American population are not working hard enough, or not doing what they need to do, and are not following the rules, and so you witness some tension between the Black population, and it might be newly arrived immigrants from an Afro-Latino population, and it might be African Americans that are generationally being here. And you've stepped into it, and you are trying to help the group not go down a path of pitting one group against the other, right? So you want, as a facilitator, to step in. What kinds of things can you say when you see inter-ethnic dynamics going on like that, where one group is looking down on the other? And it could be newly arrived immigrants looking down on African Americans that are generationally been here. What kinds of things might you say or do?
what I have seen is people from the same origin. Let's say someone from Mexico has been in America, let's say 10 years, 15 years. So I put them on staff hoping that it's going to have the new immigrants because they have the same background. But the old one treat the other one like nothing. I mean, it could be an exception, but I've seen that. The one here from the same group, just condescending. I don't know what to do because I'm different. I'm like, I hope you will be the bridge for me, but now I have to intervene to say this is not acceptable. So that's my comment.
Mm-hmm. Others want to say what you might say or do in that situation? It's interethnic politics.
What I would have said. I was shocked. I didn't say anything right. I just want to protect the weaker one.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't talk to the when it happened. I didn't pay attention to that one because it was my staff. I knew him. I know I'm gonna get I have to sit down with them or train them. But at least the one who came, the client, the participant, I wanted to lift her up and make sure that.
Yeah.
So actually, she came crying because I treated so well. She said, I've been coming here for so many years. This is the first time they treat me like a human being. And then she was crying, and I was like, I thought I did something wrong because my Spanish is limited. But I was like, okay.
Yeah. Sahira?
So, I'm generally a fan of trying to facilitate conversations between people. But first, I think I would, pull the one who seems to be creating the tension to the side to just talk like, hey, this might be my perspective. I might be off. I welcome, feedback on what I'm seeing and what I'm saying. But this is what I noticed, and to just call it out. And then give them a chance to correct any of my misperceptions first. But, if they're valid perceptions and they recognize that this is what they're doing, like try to facilitate some way for the two to come together. And it's hard, if I'm in the same race, I think it's a little easier for me personally to, try to be the bridge or help serve as a bridge. I think for me it's harder when I'm not as familiar with the culture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so what we've actually heard from you all is about right, that there are times when too much falls on the people of color, right? And then there are other times when a person of color from a certain community is needed to step in, right? And so it is important to be a bridge when you can be a bridge for a conversation that is about your own people, right? However, in a situation like that, this is one that happens in all sorts of settings. Newly arrived immigrants, historic, people of color that have been here generationally, and how we need to try to facilitate what we can in that space, but take that learning opportunity to have them understand history, right? And do it in a way where we do pull away from the individuals, because otherwise it can sometimes suddenly become, it could derail everything in that meeting or that presentation, right? Because that conversation is heavy and deep and it needs time. And rushing it isn't gonna solve it in that moment. So what we can do is sort of make a statement that puts history at the center and talk about historically we have immigrant populations that have that sense of hope or belief in the American dream that actually does diminish over time. After a generation, they actually start sounding like African Americans and Native Americans and Chicanos here. And so we can make statements that will help sort of make sure that we don't allow the conversation to just sit, right? Because it's almost like saying nothing if we don't make a statement or a stand in that conversation. So something does need to be said, but it needs to be brief and it needs to be in a way that doesn't start focusing on the individuals in a way that completely derails that presentation. I am going to rush us to one final one because your notes had a lot on how white people sometimes take the conversation to, let's say you had a white group meeting, or it could even be a multiracial group, and a white female in the mix might say, why do we keep talking about race? Why don't we talk about LGBTQ issues or other issues that I think are just as important and just as relevant in the current situation that we're in the US? So you're in a setting where it's supposed to be a conversation about race, and a white female has stepped up and said, we keep ignoring LGBTQ populations, and we need to stop doing that. It's unfair on that population. They are experiencing so much hurt in the world. So what is it that you do in that scenario? So just a few people want to jump in, and maybe people that haven't spoken yet. So I want to hear from people that haven't said anything. What would you say regarding that scenario? Give it a go. Remember, practice, right? Practice is how we get better at interrupting things, or so give it a go. Be okay. You're in a space where everyone is good with just you trying it.
I would say, this is Suzanne, I would probably say something like, I agree, we really do need to, put energy in that area. But the quantity, of people that we're addressing right now, we're struggling to deal with that. But we have been trying to include the discussion in our presentations. What do you think we could do? I would ask them, how do you think we could better do it?
Anyone else? I'd like at least one other person that hasn't spoken.
This is Michael. I would be sure that there is another meeting and be aware of the other sessions, and allow them to know that there is a session for LGBTQ and they're meeting in room so-and-so. But the focus for this session is around the racial issues. And then I'd wait for their comment.
Okay, good. Both of you have picked up on ways in which we mustn't diminish, right? Because it could be a genuine concern. And also to realize, and a word that we probably need to spend more time unpacking and understanding is the word intersectionality, right? And the whole notion that we are multiple identities, and be able to say to that person and to the group that, affirm them in saying, yes, LGBTQ issues do matter, and we are all layered with different identities that are compounding. And that's the key piece, how everything compounds. And in a world where we don't look at race, which actually hurts every group, right, in different ways, it dehumanizes white people, but it definitely kills and locks up and economically hurts people of color, right? We know that race is a compounding factor. So if you are trans and black, the things that happen in society are going to be that much worse than if you are just trans, right, and white. So helping them understand intersectionality, asking them how is a great way as well. Sam was saying how, you know, asking them, what do you think? How can we bring this in a way? And also directing them to further resources is great, because it sort of gives them that sense that we do feel that this matters and we do need to talk about it in these different sessions. But in that space, definitely not diminishing if it's coming from a genuine place. Now I'm going to give you, this is where you got to read it, right? You've got to see, is it coming from a genuine place, or is it someone just trying to derail the conversation? And you might be able to tell, right, from having known that person, or they do it every time, or they really don't want to talk about race, right? They will anything but. It's like a escapism, right? And that kind of an ism. They're trying to get away from talking about race. That's a derailing tactic. And that's one where you do, as a facilitator, need to still talk about intersectionality, but then forefront race again and say how it is the glue. It's like that matrix of domination that happens that keeps everything in place, and race is definitely the one that needs to be uplifted. And another comment that can be made is how you can openly say how every space that we're in, we might have a different focus. And sometimes, even though we believe in intersectionality, we want to forefront one of the isms. And in this space, we're forefronting race. So let us all try to stay with that conversation, knowing full well that there are other isms at play as well. So using that kind of language where we don't completely diminish, because it could be coming from a real place of genuine concern, but bringing it back and saying that we're going to forefront race in this conversation, knowing the other isms matter. So that's some of the ways to bring it back, and know that you will encounter people that are resistant to talking about race, and they will deliberately derail, and that happens, right? They really don't want to go there, and that becomes the trickier conversation. So that's where you do need to pull it back in and help them understand that today we're talking about this, but we believe in intersectionality. Now, we have very little time, in fact, only a couple of minutes. I'm going to leave that for questions and put up tools in a follow-up email that Kinkini is going to send out to you all. And I'm going to give you videos and articles and other tools that might be useful to you for that sort of interpersonal piece of racism that we're talking about and the internalized. But I would like to leave the last couple of minutes for anything anyone wants to say, and it could be a question or it could be a comment. So just open to anyone. Question or comment?
Yes. Sorry, folks. Public health is all about the greatest good for the greatest number of people, right? So public health never have resources, so you have to prioritize. Now, looking at the United States and looking at the volume of race, of people of color, how do you prioritize the resources in terms of, even in a conference, we have two days to treat things about LGBTQ while we have a mountain of racial issues that we haven't even solved. How do you prioritize that, knowing that public health also is all about exceptions? It's not always about the greatest good.
So you're asking, how do we prioritize so many different issues when it's really about the public good, right? And we have to look at what the thing that's going to help most needs to be addressed.
More.
Yeah. Well, what I would say with that is the LGBTQ population is one that is larger than most of us like to admit, number one. And the health disparities for that population that intersect with race and racism are so hugely compounded. If you look at trans women in particular, right? Trans people of color, when you look at trans people of color, you're going to find that the compounding effects of being a person of color and trans result in health disparities that make that population, in public health terms, a population we should really be talking about, right? And we should really be putting a lot more energy into than we are. So intersectionality does matter. And in a public health perspective, we do need to look at multiple identities, but definitely race matters in the intersection of everything, right? So sometimes it is good to uplift populations that in that intersectional lens are being impacted most, right? So the it's like, look, I don't know if you've ever read the book, the Miner's Canary, right? And it really tells us to look at the most vulnerable populations in a society if we're ever going to uplift the whole society. We have to look at the most vulnerable. And it could be Black males in the prison industrial complex, right? It could be, so it's different populations that have to be targeted, and it's usually intersectional. But definitely race is the one that is intersecting everything. Any other questions or comments, or even based on what was just said?
I'm so grateful for really bringing back real experiences that have happened at the conference, and really taking the time to reflect and providing an opportunity for practice. I cannot agree with you more that it is about practicing that will build our confidence in this work and make us good facilitators and be able to facilitate with humility in this journey and continue to grow and lift each other and support one another. So I'm grateful that even though I was late, that I was able to make it. Thank you so much for facilitating.
Thank you, Brenda. And those are probably the finest words to end on. I know we're at 5:03, and I appreciate you hanging on past the time limit. Know that this is a long-term journey, right? It's we're all trying to get better, and it is us trying to humanize each other and bring dignity to spaces. And practice is what it's going to take for us to be better human beings, literally. So thank you all for your engagement and participation. Please send questions if there are any additional ones through the chat as well. And we're going to send you tools and other resources as a follow-up. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kira. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.